Hello, everyone. My name is Ross Fairley, and I head up the renewable energy team at Burgess Salmon. Welcome to this podcast on joint development agreements. I'm delighted to be joined today by my colleagues, Camilla Usher-Clark and Alec Whiter. And together, we're going to hopefully answer many of the questions that you might have about these types of arrangements, which are used increasingly in the clean energy sector. Don't get hung up on the title, Joint Development Agreements, JDAs. They mean a lot of different things to a lot of different people, and we can talk you through that. This is intended to be a guide to give you an overview of why they are used, the issues to consider, and we'll also tackle some of the pinch points at the back end of this broadcast. If you want to know any more about what we do, about JDAs themselves, then feel free to contact any of the team here talking via the Burgess Salmon website. So without further ado, I'm going to move on to look at and ask Alec in particular what a JDA is. It's a broad term, Alec. Can you explain the types of arrangements we're talking about here and give us a brief on some of the names that people use to describe these things if it's different to JDA?
Thanks very much, Ross. Yes, from my perspective, I think, as you said, a JDA is sort of an umbrella term for arrangements in the UK energy sector between two or more parties. Often one of them a well-established developer and another one whose core business may not be the development of UK energy assets, setting out how they will partner together and work for the development of early-stage energy projects up to sort of ready-to-build stage, and potentially longer-term arrangements, including onward sale and purchase arrangements and or construction and operation of such projects. And that means that they have a lot of different names. So you might hear sort of development agreements, you might hear shareholders agreements, you might hear development services agreements, framework agreements. But all of these things generally are trying to deal with the same theme, and that is effectively two entities partnering together and trying to develop projects to get them to a set stage and setting out between themselves how they will work together, what each one will bring, and what they will do to develop those projects.
And is it fair to say that they go by a number of different names and different types, and we often see clients starting at one end of the scale and then possibly moving down the other end of the scale in terms of complication? Perhaps you could just tackle that one.
I think that is a very true comment. So often when we get involved with JDAs at the first stage, what we'll have is a set of heads of terms, sort of setting out relatively loosely how the parties intend to work together. And for some clients, that might be enough because it sets out the broad key commercial terms that each party is comfortable with, and it's a non-exclusive relationship and enables the parties to have comfort around what is going to come forward in the pipeline. But as you sort of go down the level of certainty and complexity that clients are looking for, you might start introducing concepts like exclusivity. So certain clients have to or would like to make sure that they have got exclusivity over a pipeline of early development projects coming forward from a developer. If we start introducing concepts like exclusivity, you might then also have concepts like setting up purchasing those projects, the terms of what those purchases will look like. So then you get into the shared purchase agreements. You might also have development services agreements setting out how those projects will be developed up to a set stage, at which point the companies might then be purchased by one of the JDA parties. You might also have, if you are setting up a development company or a JV company between the two or more parties who will own some of the early stage projects, things like shareholders agreements, shareholder loans, articles, and various other agreements setting out how the parties will work. And I think it is fair to say that often people at the first stage of these types of arrangements expect the number and type of the agreements to be relatively low. But as we start talking through the various options and some of the issues that typically crop up on these types of arrangements, often we find the complexity and the number of documents does tend to increase as each party goes through the various permutations of options and decides what's in its best interest.
Okay, thanks for that. We've got some JDA bingo at the bottom of the slide. If you're listening to this, you won't see it, but if you're looking at the slide, you'll see it. We've got joint development agreement, development services agreement, framework agreement, partnership agreement, collaboration agreement, MSA,
management services agreement, I suspect.
management services agreement. There you go. So these things are known by different nomenclatures, but they are broadly trying to achieve the same thing. And then if we move on, I suppose it would be useful, Alec, to look at a few of the drivers and explain to the listeners why we are tending to see more and more of these arrangements being contracted.
Thanks, Ross. I think it's a really good question, and it's actually one we're being asked quite a lot. And I think the answer is a mixture of certainty, risk allocation, pooling, development expertise, returns, and currently interest rates. So the advantage of these types of arrangements is that it can enable parties to have greater certainty around the development of early stage energy projects. Now, the UK energy development scene is becoming increasingly risky to some extent as a result of grid delays, the reformation of the electricity industry codes generally, and that is leading to more development expenditure having to be incurred to develop early stage projects, and actually a greater likelihood potentially of projects falling away at an early stage. But also those projects that are successful are typically attracting relatively high hurdle rates for those people involved. So what we are seeing is a mixture of developers wanting to bring in early stage capital to help fund and share the development risk with others, but also some of the funds and other entities who are interested in investing in types of renewable projects, looking to get involved with energy projects at an earlier stage and have become slightly more comfortable with development risk. So they are partnering up to have a situation in which they are sharing between them development risk. And for obviously for the fund, the benefit of this is that it gets access to a number of early stage projects at hopefully an attractive rate for it. And for the developer, it has some of the certainty around sharing the development costs, but also some certainty around where the projects will be sold and what its returns overall will be. I think generally the other drivers that we're seeing are actually around sort of a lot of international businesses looking at the UK as a relatively mature market for energy technologies generally, and also a very good test bed for certain business cases. So we've seen a lot of interest in the UK market around solar, batteries, co-located projects, and various other things. And a lot of what we've seen is actually some international businesses and funds looking to use the expertise developed in the UK energy market and kind of internationalize that expertise around the world.
Okay, no, thanks very much for that, Alec. And on this slide, if you're looking at it, there's a number of factors, some of which Alec mentioned for the previous slide, that I guess drives the level of complication and sophistication of your arrangement, whatever it's going to be. Things like exit strategy, stick and flip, objectives of the participants in that, the stages of the projects, the exclusivity, and so forth. Well, let's move on. I'm delighted to welcome Camilla. Camilla, hello there. How are you doing? We've heard about the different terms and the different drivers from Alec. Can you expand a little bit for us, please, on the range and variety of types of model that we are seeing, and possibly some of the pros and cons, I guess, of those?
Yes, thank you, Ross. Yes, we've seen a wide variety of models, and as you say, there are some key differentiators that tend to drive which model people select, and Alec, in fact, has already alluded to a few of those. One of the things that we tend to find is at the forefront of people's minds when they come to talk to us is timetable. There's usually a sense of urgency in putting these things together, and that's often driven by a perceived sort of strength of the opportunity, and in particular in the case of an investor or a funder, somebody who's looking to secure what they perceive to be a strong portfolio or pipeline. So it's about people's desire to secure a good deal. Another obvious driver for the type of model that's selected is cost, and that's another one we can talk about a bit more in a minute, but also how committed the parties are. which can turn on a number of factors, and a number of the drivers on the previous slide will be relevant here, as well as things like tax can be a key driver for some people. It's not at all unusual, actually, for clients to change their minds once we've had an initial conversation with them about a prospective JDA. And again, I think Alex already alluded to that, because they may have an idea in their heads as to what they think they want to document. But I think once we've started to sort of peel the onion with them, we find that it may be that a slightly different model suits them better. So what the next few slides are going to illustrate are some of the most common models that we see. So I'll take you through each of them briefly. At one end of the bookshelf, the very simplest model that we see is something that's effectively akin to a sort of binding heads of terms. The parties will have largely developed the ideas on their own. There might be a term sheet that they're really just looking to top and tail and turn into something that's legally binding. So in essence here, you've got two parties that have decided that there are synergies between them, and they can take these and develop something successful together, and in a way that perhaps they can't individually. So typically you might have a developer with an early stage portfolio who doesn't have the capacity to build it out because they need some more funding, and you may have a funder who's looking for a strong pipeline of projects to bring through to RTB status and beyond. So this can seem like a simple solution and an easy and cost-effective way forward, and in some instances it will be. It can suit an early stage portfolio where there's a high degree of uncertainty about how successful the venture might be. And at the same time, though, this type of model might not be as suited to sort of fully incentivizing the parties to see it become successful, because it's just quite a loose contract. So you can find that there's a higher risk of failure with this type of model. But it's really sort of horses for courses, and it can be quite cost effective, but it's in short, it's not a very sort of sticky option. So if we move on to the other end of the bookshelf, you've got a sort of fully pre-wired contractual arrangement where there's a very clear path set between the parties in terms of how the projects are developed, what milestones they might need to meet to be funded. And with this sort of arrangement, the parties are very heavily incentivized to see that the JDA is successful. We've seen this type of arrangement operated. It's perhaps not as usual. It can suit a larger scale portfolio of potential projects, or a longer term arrangement where you've got parties who know going into it that, you know, the size of the opportunity that's there. Where we've seen it done well in the past, in fact, it was done so well, there was very little need for the lawyers to input on the future sort of rollout of the documentation, because the JDA actually included a suite of template documents that allowed the developer to develop the pipeline, show that each project was meeting the status and the milestones that were required to secure further funding, or to bring it to a stage where actually the investor was willing to then take that project on and buy it effectively off the developer. And there was a full set of templates that meant that they could just keep rolling them out between them. So this can be a very effective model. It's certainly not the cheapest. Although one might argue that actually in some instances, a large upfront cost may pay dividends later on. If you've got a longer term arrangement, it can actually be quite cost effective if you're not looking for lawyers to help you deal with a series of sales of each project as it comes through. So these two models that I've discussed so far are broadly contractual models. The other one that we see commonly is a corporate joint venture. And that's what we're showing on this slide now. So this model is quite different, and it entails the parties going into an enduring and much more corporate-y relationship where you actually co-own a third vehicle together. It's more complex to go into because the parties need to think about things like the allocation of the equity between them. if they own something 50-50 and everything is a joint decision, or does one party have a majority ownership and one's sitting in a minority position? And it leads to a whole series of different discussions around the governance, administration and operation of that third party, that vehicle that they've got between them. So there's a lot more to think about, but again, we've seen it deployed very successfully. I can think of one particular example where it was deployed on a single but sizable asset, where the early stage developer brought in a funder to help build out the project. And the particular exit strategy for both of them on that one was to see the eventual market sale of that project so that both of them could secure some upside from it. So there can be instances where this model works particularly well. There are a few more things to think about in terms of this model, and in particular on the exit side. So you need to think about what happens when JDAs don't work out, and we're going to come on to that later. But this model can throw up some really interesting dynamics in the context of that question.
That's great. Thank you very much, Camilla, and indeed, Alec. And we'll end this first part there. It's a really good guide, really, as to what these types of arrangement are, and the key different models that we see. In the next bit, what we're going to do is delve into some of the key issues, the terms and the concepts of these types of arrangements. So join us in a moment for that.